I'm Danielle Houston. I'm the host of this podcast, The Checkup. And in my ongoing effort to help the Pacific Northwest get to know Lockton and all of the smart people that I work with here, I am bringing you another episode today highlighting our director and officers' expertise, or as we call it around the office, D&O. We are really proud to have Ben Hale with us. He's an East Coast guy. Don't hold it against him. He wasn't born and raised there.
Not true.
In all kidding aside, West Coast, we love the East Coast. And one of the things that I love about Lockton is that no matter where the expertise lives, we can work anywhere. So Ben is a new addition to us. He has been with Lockton for about 6 months, which means I only have about 3 months on him. We are both navigating these new waters together. But Ben joined us with the idea and the intent of this using his expertise in D&O to help employers navigate what turns out to be pretty complicated waters. It's not the D&O that it used to be. So Ben, with his 18 years of experience, joined Lockton. Ben, what have I left out about your background that you want people to know?
I think you covered most of it, Danielle. I've been a broker for 12 years. I was D&O underwriter for 7 or 8 prior to being a broker. And like you said, the market has gotten really challenging. Really, in the last couple of years, COVID didn't help. So it's a much different environment than the first 15 or 16 years that I worked in this industry. A lot of new challenges.
I've learned a lot already just by listening to you in some of our internal meetings. I will even confess to Googling words I have never heard before, as you've talked about, the challenges and what organizations are trying to solve for. But before we jump into those complexities, like I mentioned, you and I are navigating the same new waters of Lockton. We made big decisions and big changes to come here. So would you share with us, why did you choose Lockton? Because I would imagine that with your background and the things that you could go anywhere.
Well, thank you. So it always comes down to people. The people that Lockton has hired are really some of the best and brightest from throughout the industry. A gentleman named Devin Beresheim came over. That was a big deal. He ran Marsh FinPro, where I came from. So that was part of it. And just getting to know the people at Lockton. I work in the Mountain West series, like you, Danielle, and the vision of how to grow the business, the unique sort of nature of being a privately held organization, and how that impacts their vision of how how we're going to grow, was really appealing. And so I got to know the people, I got to know the vision, and it all worked out. It made sense.
And, like I mentioned before, and this was one of the things I found appealing about Lockton, is that there are so many smart people, and the intent is always, it doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter which Lockton office you work in. If you have the smarts or the skill that is needed by a client anywhere, then we're going to use that. And people are so very willing to share their expertise and jump in to help employers solve for big, complicated things like
Yep,
D&O.
that's right. I was on a call yesterday with a colleague in Washington, D.C., 2 in Kansas City, and then 2 in Denver, talking about analytics, which is one of my passions, and I think really important with the D&O market where it is, to take a step back and look at all of the data that we have about D&O losses, securities claims. There's tons of data. And to your point, we brought in kind of the right people from the different offices. And I think we have a good plan for how to have the best analytics in the industry.
So, analytics, is that one of the things that makes our D&O services special?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so D&O, it covers the the personal assets of the individual people, and that's one part of the contract. And then it covers the balance sheet of the organization. The losses that have made the D&O market a hard market for the last couple of years come from the balance sheet side primarily. I mean, there are some what we call side A losses, personal asset losses, but by far the majority of losses come from the balance sheet protection side. And so to take a step back and look at what are the types of losses that have put the market to where it is, it's all public. The information is public. These are publicly traded companies. The securities claims being brought are public, whether or not they're dismissed or not public. And if they end up getting through dismissal and getting to a settlement, those numbers are also public. So we have lots of data, and we can see for a certain company in a certain industry, a certain market cap, other important factors like beta and PE ratio. We can look at all those factors and really have a good idea as what sort of risk profile that company has from a D&O perspective. And then if you're knowing that if the costs went up 60% last year and are potentially going to go up even further this year, take a step back, look at how a company is buying this insurance. Does it still make sense to buy the way that the company has for the last 10 years through a soft market? And so, yeah, it's vitally important. And then separately have the conversation about the personal asset side. And that's not so much analytics, that side. That's something where we need to talk about the individual people, how much insurance makes them feel comfortable, and sort of deal with that conversation separately.
Is there one of those two sides that's more complex than the other?
I think they're just different. One side, the balance sheet side, there's lots of data, and it's much easier to quantify that risk. But on the personal asset side, it's much less likely that there'll ever be a loss there. But if there is, it becomes extremely important to the individual people at the company that they have that, more than enough insurance in place. And so, I would say that's more complicated. How much side A to buy is, it's a little harder to put data behind that sort of decision-making process.
And for those who might not be as familiar with D&O, and likely if they're not familiar with it, they're probably not purchasing it. But for the sake of education, when we talk about D&O and a hard market, is that really because if a company gets sued, everybody in that company who runs that company is getting sued? Or, is there something else playing into that? Can you give us an example?
No, it's based on just the number of lawsuits. So there's a very active plaintiffs bar in this country, in the United States, that is out there watching public companies. And as they perform and they make announcements publicly, and their stock reacts to those announcements or to the statements they make, and if there's a stock drop following a certain statement that the company or any of the individuals make, then they potentially will bring a lawsuit that will name. Actually, we have data on this. Almost 100% of the time, it will name the CEO, name the entity itself. About half the time, the CFO is named, and about a quarter of the time or so, outside directors are named. So it's not really, as far as the balance sheet protection side of the conversation, it's not so important who is named. It's just from an underwriter's perspective, it's the number of lawsuits. Leading up to 2017, there was about 200 or so suits a year. That number ticked up to 300, then 430 or so, and was 430 for two consecutive years. Ticked down last year, but still well above 300. So still well above where the claims had been historically. So there's just more claims. Those claims are normally going to be covered by D&O insurance. These are public companies. Most of them buy D&O. I'd say at least 9 out of 10 of them buy D&O. So the underwriters are seeing more lawsuits, and so they've had to adjust their book accordingly. And then COVID didn't help. Now we have just a lot of uncertainty as far as how companies would be impacted by COVID, the way that they respond. There's a lot of uncertainty there, as well as about what companies should be saying, not saying. And so that certainly pushed the market further into a hard market.
Is it safe to say not if your publicly traded company gets sued, but when?
I would say no.
Okay.
I guess, yeah. I mean, if we're going on to infinity, yes. I don't like that statement as much for D&O as I do for cyber. For
Got it.
cyber, absolutely, yes. There's going to be a breach. There's certain companies that are making widgets that, have a really long-term earnings history. They have visibility into their future earnings, very consistent stock performance, really should never have a claim. That never say never. And there's always the unforeseeable event in the future. But there are certain companies out there that have a very low risk from a D&O insurance perspective. Those companies have been impacted by the hard market really more than I think they probably should. These are, D&O insurance buyers, 30 years, 40 years of buying insurance, no claims, seeing significant increases in premium. And that's tough. I mean, that's tough to explain. And that's where, I think the analytics side does come in to say, okay, you buy, let's just, for example, say it's a $5 billion market cap company, buys $100 million of D&O insurance, and they've increased those limits over the years as the market was soft and pricing was going down every year, increasing limits. And so now we see a 30% increase one year, a 50% increase the next year, and now we're at this year. It is worth taking a step back and saying, that your D&O limits went up from 30 to 50 to 70 to 100 over that 10 or 15 years. Is it still the right decision to buy 100 million? You don't have to. Should you transfer some of that to side A? It's less expensive to buy side A. And just to really have a conversation about retention, limit, and premium, and the T-core conversation. What's the T-core? How is it impacted by lowering limits, raising retention, and how those different levers impact premium? Then we can have a really sort of educated financial conversation about the balance sheet side, because that's what it is. It's a financial risk transfer decision that a public company makes. It's not personal assets. That's a different conversation. But for the balance sheet side, it's a conversation that I think we need to have more informed clients. We have the data, and we just need to present it in smarter ways.
So who are the companies out there that we can really help, those who need us?
Yeah, I'd say it's, I can't think of any that it wouldn't help. I'm biased, though. I definitely think fast growers, emerging tech, not educated so much on D&O. I mean, I enjoy having those conversations with companies that are just first learning about D&O, because it's absolutely vitally important to the entire process of running a business. You have to have it. Executives need to be able to make decisions, even hard decisions, because it's what's best based on the information that they have on that day. And it could be that a quarter later, it turns out that was wrong and the stock drops. And the plaintiff's bar isn't concerned with right or wrong. The fact is, you said this on this day, and then this 3 months later, and the stock was impacted. And so to understand how D&O insurance, how it can be used by companies and what its purpose is really important. And many sort of new companies don't really know what D&O is. Why is it important to them? And that's from a balance sheet protection standpoint and a personal asset standpoint. Many companies once they're public and once they have a significant market cap, it's their largest risk is just simply the fact that they're publicly traded. They think of risks in terms of property, casualty, benefits, but really just, the fact that you are a publicly traded company can be the largest risk that a company has. And so to protect that risk through insurance is really important. And then separately, listen, if everything goes wrong and, we saw a very large insurance company almost go out of business about 12 years ago, which we thought never, ever could happen. And so you never know. And if a company has liquidity challenges and they don't have the money to indemnify their individual directors and officers, and those individuals are named in a lawsuit in their capacity as a director or officer for that company, it doesn't matter. They have to pay individually for those costs if the company can't indemnify. So side A, that is extraordinarily important that companies get that side right as well. So yeah, I would say for any company, we would love to have the conversation, but certainly, those that are new to the game and growing quickly and want to understand what's out there, what their options are. I guess that would be my my first love.
Okay. So what are we doing that's special or unique in this space?
Yeah, back to analytics. So, just taking the economic cost of risk or total cost of risk conversation a little bit further than I think others are. So to have the conversation by layer, what is the cost of this layer? What's the risk of this layer? So, for example, a public company will take our $5 billion market cap company from the previous example that buys D&O insurance. We look at the retention and then we look at each layer. What's the cost and what's the risk? And let's look at where it was last year. That's what underwriters do. They look at this year's risk relative to last in order to make a decision as far as premium. And so we look at that risk to transfer and that risk to retain, and have a conversation about each layer. Does it make sense to continue to transfer or not? And we can do that up to hundreds of millions of dollars of insurance, and try to take a little bit of the personal side of it out of that conversation, keeping that again separate for a side A. Let's separate those two conversations, and instead just really looking at the economic cost of risk of each layer of insurance, and having a more just a more robust conversation as far as the data that supports our recommendation, and going from there. I think we also have some really great lawyers that help us with coverage. I mean, coverage is vitally important. I haven't talked about that yet. It's another soft market relic that is being picked at by carriers, taking away coverage, and that's somewhere else that I think Lockton does really well.
Well, and I know that you are one of the people in this mix that makes it special. I've heard really great things about your smarts and your skills in working with clients to really help them understand what they need and why. And like with anything, we can always sell insurance, but the difference is the people who can really help clients feel empowered and educated about what they're doing and why. So
that's right. Thank you, Danielle.
Hey, any time, like I said, I feel like, I have certainly learned about your space, and it's, a world away from the work that I typically do, but certainly I hear concerns often from employers about getting sued and how and why. And I think having that ability to introduce someone like you who can help, give some peace of mind to clients in some other spaces is really, really important. Anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up our conversation today?
I guess just, we don't want to forget service, I mean that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the team that I work with here is the best in the industry as far as just keeping things on track and making our clients' lives a little bit less stressful. We have great support. So all of them do a great job, and we can be the smartest people in the world, but we have to provide that as well. And I think we do really well.
Yes, I agree. We can't do it alone, and putting the insurance in place is just one of those steps. I invite you to connect with us. If there has been anything in this conversation that has resonated, that has sparked even a question of you don't understand perhaps some of the elements of your D&O, or you haven't looked at this coverage and you've been taking those increases, I invite you to connect with us, Ben directly or myself. We can help get the right people at the table for you to help you manage this area of your risk as well. So connect with us. You can follow my podcast on iTunes. You can follow the video series on YouTube. Lots of smart people at Lockton who would love to bring their smarts to deliver great service to you. Take good care. Thanks for checking in today.